Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Green Supply Chain Insights. I'm Juan, and today is our final episode of the year. We decided to do this one live as well, like we did the last one. Always a bit short notice, so with all likelihood, you're going to be catching this on demand. But kind of the biggest driver was that given how 2025 has unfolded, we thought it'd be more honest to um, basically let the year more or less wrap up and be able to give you a really kind of almost closed look at what the year has been, right? Making sure that we're reflecting the real final picture here, right? So today I'm going to be kind of covering a little bit of that picture of sustainable supply chains in 2025, what has changed, and how we can use some of those changes as we prepare or head into 2026. Again, the last 12 months have certainly drastically reshaped how supply chains operate, particularly from a sustainability lens, let's say, from a risk management standpoint as well, and how both risk and sustainability then becomes a conversation in senior leaderships and in boardrooms, right? There's a few factors that have led to this ruckus, let's say. On the one side, we've got, of course, the Trump effect that is making an impact globally. And on the opposite side, in a way, we have an increased frequency of climate events and supply chain disruptions that keep making things more difficult in a way, right? So that's made sustainability and resilience of supply chains a core business concern. So it's no longer a side topic or kind of like a general awareness theme, but it's something that we need to be concerned of on an operational level, right? So with that in mind, today I want to do three things. I want to kind of zoom out into 2025 and look at the big picture for that year. I want to give a breakdown of what really changed, what really shifted, right? Because there's been a lot of talk and there's been a lot of noise, but I want to be kind of more specific of, hey, these are the areas where actually there has been specific change, particularly around regulation, around technology, and around how we operate sustainable supply chains. And then I will close very briefly by giving kind of what I think should be the clear top three priorities for 2026. So let's start with that big picture, right? So as we close 2025, what are the major shifts that shape supply chains globally, especially sustainable supply chains, and why do they matter now more than ever, right? So definitely trade friction and trade relationships has been I think at the center of the conversation globally this year. I was just reading yesterday that aranceles, which is essentially the Spanish word for tariffs, was selected as the Spanish word of the year, right? Which I think really shows what the conversation has been this year and how geopolitics have been basically in our day-to-day lives. I think both at work and to an extent even in our personal lives, right? I think the whole geopolitical conversation and the whole reconfiguration of trade because of how regional blocks are working between each other, that's making that's having a clear impact on our lives, right? And I don't think that's necessarily going to change. If anything, it may get more acute in 2026, right? On the other side of that balance, 2025 was also marked by, again, once more, a year with unusually high global temperatures. I think once more it ranked, or at least in some countries ranked among the warmest on record, which it just sadly continues to be something that is happening year on year. The balance of deadly floodings in some regions and deadly wildfires in others, again, it's just a clear signal of the continuation of costly climate disasters, which is becoming a bigger and bigger issue. And it has impacts ultimately worldwide, regardless of whether they're localized in specific regions, right? So all of these climate disruptions are making leaders kind of forcing them to be more focused on risk exposure and not treat risk as a kind of collateral insurable thing, but rather something that needs to be brought into our day-to-day operations, right? I think that's one of the biggest changes that we see today, is that essentially risk is almost like a constant state now, right? And with that in mind, and kind of with that realization of how we need to manage risk constantly, I think it led to the realization that it's even more important to treat sustainability and technology as two teams that can work together and that can, by combining them, help us alleviate some of those risks, right? But on that theme of kind of risk and resilience in our global supply chains, right? So how can we say leaders should interpret this new risk landscape that we're heading into 2026 with, right? So one element is, again, as I just said, I think geopolitical instability is going to continue to be a constant, at least over the next year, which is a key reason why I believe businesses have to build or reinforce more agile processes so that they can reconfigure trade partners quickly when necessary, right? Because I think that that's going to continue to be a reality, one being pushed by the geopolitical landscape, but another one also being pushed or forced upon them by the climate disruptions to the supply chain, right? So with climate shocks no longer being rare events, they are becoming operational realities. We then need to move towards that continuous risk assessment, continuous risk mitigation as part of our operations, basically. The third leg of this is, of course, the regulatory framework, regulatory uncertainty, regulatory volatility that we have definitely had this year. And that leads to financial risk, right? I think that's very clear right now. I mean, not only is there a financial risk exposure from the implementation of some of those regulations, but the uncertainty and the volatility has also proven to create and cause significant financial impacts, right? That to me kind of points to the realization that our planning needs to be more dynamic, right? So static long-term plannings no longer fit the bill, if you will, and we need to figure out ways in which we can kind of more constantly be working and using monitoring, reporting, and verification of our supply chain data to quickly anticipate and adapt to new processes, right? I think, again, it all goes back to this challenging but yet continuous process of monitoring and reaction and timely reaction in particular, right? We of course need to zoom in a bit more or discuss a bit more the regulation and particularly the sustainability regulation space and what that's been for 2025, right? So what did I see supply chain and industry leaders do about sustainability regulation in 2025? And in this kind of topic, I'm mostly going to be focused around European legislation. Again, we've seen everything that's happened this year with regulations like CSRD and CS3D in Omnibus 1. We've seen and have discussed thoroughly everything that's happened with the EUDR. Both of them through very conflicting legislative processes finally came to their current outcome, let's say, because I think there's still chances that things are going to continue to be uncertain next year across all of them. We also have incoming deadlines and incoming implementations for things like digital product passports on certain sectors. So again, how business leaders need to start thinking and preparing for that. And I think particularly linked to the whole conversation around Omnibus 1 and the broader regulatory simplification that has come with 2025, a red flag, let's say, that I see here is that this regulatory simplification or frankly deregulation that we've seen in 2025 that is being sold as a win for business might not be as much of a win in my view. So of course, lowering kind of the risks or the needs for bureaucracy is important, but I think what businesses also need to realize is that with everything that's happening in the world and all of that impact that we have on supply chain disruptions, they should heavily consider, in my view, adopting some of these non-financial reporting rules, some of these supply chain due diligence measures on a voluntary approach. So not just because of regulatory pressure, it's just because, again, linked to that risk management and risk exposure, it will be valuable for them to do so, right? That links to that conversation of essentially how companies could and should move beyond compliance, right? So it's not just about ensuring compliance with the regulation, which is of course a priority, but it's around understanding how the risks of our supply chain are there, whether the regulation is enforced or not, right? So some of these measures around sustainability have to be built into our procurement process. They have to be built into our customer success and customer relationships processes as well, because the financial results of our businesses, both on the top line and bottom line, are going to be impacted by how we manage our supply chains beyond what the regulation seems to now be asking of us, right? So I think the companies that will pull ahead are the ones that are using the regulatory kind of signal as a guiding point, right? More than as kind of just the clear minimum requirement, right? And actually doing more can come back to benefit them financially. And sure, again, doing more comes with its own challenges, because how do we do more? How do we manage when resources are scarce? And that's, I think, the role that the technology plays, right? So, of course, can't talk about technology today without discussing AI. I think we need to look up the impact, let's say, or where AI is going to kind of genuinely move the needle in 2026. I think the past couple of years have been more about kind of learning how to adapt, work, and best take advantage of these tools. And what we might be seeing in 2026, or what I hope we'll be seeing in 2026, is the wider spread adoption and deployment of agentic AI, moving more than from a support tool to an actual operational element, right? So that can help us anticipate disruptions, that can help us drive decisions or make decisions with their whole kind of analytics that already is taken care of by them. But can we take that kind of one step further and maybe use some of these processes to improve our decision making, either in quality or in time? And can we, of course, do this in an ethical way and where governance rules are still controlled, even though we're using agentic AI in some of our business processes, right? So I think we will see a lot of the benefits on the functionality side. We will need to monitor and heavily control the kind of ethical and governance issues that tie to agentic AI, right? And more closely to kind of our core areas, or our biggest area of expertise, is the role of technology from a traceability standpoint, right? So I mentioned digital product passports earlier. They are becoming, in a way, unavoidable. Their definition is starting to fluctuate less. I think DPPs were basically, everyone had its own definition of what a DPP was, and now we have a more concise view of what that is. And that's leading to more businesses starting to ask this type of granularity on data, in spite of whether the regulatory implementation deadline is next year or it's in 10 years from now, right? So the pressures are there commercially to deliver this product level data as opposed to aggregate reporting, right? So again, that's a place where technology plays a big role and can certainly help ease some of that burden, right? And do so in a much more seamless way. I think that kind of links to what we do, of course, at Finwood, of how we see this as a clear demand for the systems that connect this data, the operations, the verification, the whole monitoring of these supply chains, right? That's becoming more and more relevant, and it's becoming a key lever for competitiveness, right? So if we move back 12 months, you remember that when we ended 2024, the whole conversation was around strengthening the competitiveness, particularly in Europe, of European industry, right? That, unfortunately, in my opinion, took the turn to be all about deregulation, as opposed to really figuring out how to strengthen competitiveness from an innovation and technology standpoint, right? Which I think is where we should be focusing more of our efforts, right? One element around competitiveness is essentially how can companies balance cost pressure with the much needed transformation that they need, no? Not just on sustainability, but also on technology, right? So leveraging technology to meet my sustainability goals, but also leveraging technology to ease some of my cost pressures or kind of resource scarcity challenges, right? So I think that should be more of our kind of key theme as we move into 2026. Is let's bring back competitiveness as the core message, and hopefully is on the deregulation, because I don't think the two are as connected as they're being promised in a way to be, right? So from my perspective, where I see the biggest opportunities, right? I think from linking technology and sustainability, right? It's all about turning fragmented data into an operational reality or operational clarity. So how do I aggregate, manage, crunch all of my data and use that in my day-to-day? And how do I unlock traceability to ease the communications and the decision makings across very complex supply chain networks, right? So those are two very high level but very basic examples of how digital traceability can help us reduce risks, improve the response time when a disruption occurs, and in some cases even unlock market access or unlock market premiums, right? So just to wrap up, because I don't want to take more of your time, I want to close, as I mentioned at the beginning, with the top three kind of takeaways that I have for 2026, right? So up at number one, we have, and it's been the theme of this conversation today, treat risk as an operational input and not as an exception, right? So this is the whole conversation of, look, if risk becomes a constant, then it needs to be built into our operating model. It can't just be something like, well, if it happens, we resource to this, right? Because again, it very much is becoming a constant. Number two, we have build data integrity at the product and the supplier level. Again, back to the demands that you're getting, not just from the regulator, but also from your customers, is we need more granularity in that supply chain data reporting, aggregated data. It's no longer meeting requirements. And also, when you link it to risk, it's just not going to be enough to have an appropriate response to some of those disruptions that may occur, right? And lastly, number three, we have used sustainability and traceability to drive value. Don't use them just as a compliance tool. Don't use them just because, again, there's a regulatory pressure to do so, but actually take advantage of kind of flipping that conversation and say, how can sustainability help us drive growth in our businesses? We've done a couple of masterclasses where we've shown examples this year of how that, again, third-party data, it's already showing that businesses that prioritize sustainability, that prioritize ESG, have better financial results, right? And they are outperforming those who don't prioritize ESG and sustainability. So it is clearly having a positive impact in business performance. So we should stop frustratingly say that this is all about regulation and it's just cost and it's not adding anything to us, right? When data clearly points in a different direction, right? So basically to kind of wrap up, right? As we close 2025, one thing remains clear to me. is that, and I mentioned this in our last episode when we talked about the outcome of COP. I think supply chain leadership and industrial leadership can no longer be defined by ambition alone. We need to start showing the receipts. So we needed to be defined by execution. We needed to be defined by evidence-backed data, right? And with that, sorry, we went a little bit longer than I expected, but it happens when I kind of get carried away with some of these thoughts. But thank you very much for joining us to this live edition of Green Supply Chain Insights. Remember, if you join late or if you're catching this on demand, sessions are available on LinkedIn, on YouTube, on Spotify, not just these, but all of our episodes. You can have a look at those on some more specific themes. Today, we wanted to give it a more kind of broad year-round picture. But yeah, again, thank you so much. And as always, we will be back next month, in this case, next year, with more insights from the front lines of sustainability and resilient supply chains. Take care and see you in 2026.